When I do video game reviews, I always put the PC port quality and the technical issues and all of that at the end of the review. But not for this game, no. This game's technical issues deserve its own video. The technical issues have been tainting the conversations of the game and whatever amazing qualities that the game has, and believe me that this game has loads of amazing qualities. In an alternative universe where the game is actually playable and well optimized for every platform, this game would have been one of my game of the years. But not in this universe, because the universe hates us, especially you, owners of previous gen consoles who cannot afford a PC, especially in current year. So I'm gonna tackle this issue in several aspects. First, I'm gonna give you a quick rundown on what's going on and why people are absolutely fuming with anger with CDPR. Second, I will tell you my personal experience, which is not always representative to a lot of people's experience, especially when my PC is better than like, what, 70-80% of the people around the world. And finally, I want to discuss on what you and CDPR should do in regards to the future of this game and the future of next-gen gaming in general, especially when they're marred with these many technical issues. In case you missed it, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the most anticipated games of this year. Everyone wants to play this game. Everyone wants to play the next installment of CDPR's latest massive RPG, especially after the success of their Witcher series, which has spawned a very dedicated fan base, an endless amount of memes, and even a TV series starring Henry Cavill. Because, let's be real, people watch it because either it's The Witcher or it has Henry Cavill in it. The E3 2019 event is when they dropped the bombshell that they actually managed to hide very well that Keanu Reeves is going to star in it. Not only that he's starring in the game, but he's also a major role in the game. But we'll get to that in the review video. Not only that they dropped the bombshell, but they also revealed the release date of the game, which is at April 2020. That certainly aged very well. The game suffered from several delays, and none of which managed to reassure the player that this game is going to be finished anytime soon. This is really not helped with current year's safety protocols that costed millions of jobs around the world, and Tom Cruise being really pissed off at anyone who breaks it. And yet here we are in December 2020 where the game is actually out. Keep in mind that I say the game is out, not that it's finished. The developers served this game half-cooked, and both players and critics are complaining about how raw it is. The absolute best version of the game is without a doubt the PC version. You got loads of customizations, future modding capabilities, and you can even put cheats on. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X versions are the second best, but even with these three platforms, the game is marred with bugs and glitches that I'm going to discuss in the next section of this video. But by far, the absolute worst way to play this game are on the last gen consoles. And by last gen, I mean the PS4 and the Xbox One, especially the base PS4 and the base Xbox One. Yes, we are at a time where we consider those to be last gen consoles. Do you feel old yet? According to Digital Foundry, in both the base PS4 and Xbox One, the frame rate drops into beyond unacceptable levels on the 20s in a tight confined area. The game is only around borderline playable in the Xbox One X and PS4 Pro in those areas, but then you get into the open world and then you're driving around and your frames are dropping like crazy because the game is not very well optimized. I want to see what their experience would be like when they enter the Grand Imperial Mall later in the game because, oh boy, even in my consistent 30 FPS experience in the PC, the area would make the frames drop like a freaking bassline in a dubstep track. These technical issues are so severe that CDPR has to release a statement to everyone. They issue an apology and promises big patches next year alongside refunds. Now keep in mind that these are all just promises. They too promised that they're going to release the game in April 2020, and yet here we are. There are also hooplas in how the refunds work. Apparently it doesn't work very well for all the console manufacturers. Personally, I've had terrible experiences with refunds for consoles in general, so this isn't really that much of a surprise. But then the story gets even more interesting. I speculated that CDPR is merely working on the PC version of the game without considering to optimize the console versions. I was actually right on that account. But it gets better. The PS5 and the Xbox Series X versions of the game are actually running on backwards compatibility mode, which means that if you're running the game on the PS5 or the Xbox Series X, it's just the last gen console version of the game but running on a better hardware. So it's not even optimized or made specifically for the next gen hardwares. Be glad that they're backwards compatible with previous gen, because otherwise the PS5 or Xbox Series X owners desperately trying to get a hold of this console will have their purchase worth squat. More so than it already is. Even as a PC gamer, I still think that if you're promising the games to be released on the consoles, you have to optimize them on the consoles first, because they're the weakest of the bunch. The PC allows you to have more customization and headroom, whereas the consoles don't. You have to make sure that it runs on everything, or at least the platforms that you promised. Unfortunately, CDPR is way too much of a PCMR, but you can't always be a PCMR elitist when you promise to release your games on a peasant sphere as well. At the end of the day, not delivering what was promised is a very anti-consumer move, and there are only so many Twitter announcements that you can make to truly assure them of your convictions. Now, with all of that summed up, let's talk about my personal experience with this game and all of its technical issues. Personally, I'm hype on this game as well, but I'm not one of those people who watch every promotional ad or trailer that CDPR chugs in to build that hype. If I am hyped towards a game and I make a decision to play it in the future, I would not subject myself with all of these promotional stuff because they tend to spoil a lot of things. Even the E3 2019 CGI trailer spoils a significant plot point in the prologue. A prologue that to me took about 8 hours to complete, but hey, we'll talk about that in the actual game review. Stay subscribed if you don't want to miss that. Point is, I was already sold on the game and the concept itself. I love myself some cyberpunk sci-fi, and it cannot be more cyberpunk than the original Cyberpunk itself. And the thing is, unlike a lot of people who are absolutely hyped for this game because they love CDPR's previous work, I'm actually not that much of a fan of CDPR's previous work. It's not that I hate them or I think that they're bad or anything. It's just that I really couldn't get myself into the Witcher series as much as a lot of people could. But even if I am a fan of the series, I'll try to judge it as fair as possible in both its technical content and its game content. So the question right now is, do you need something premium to run the game? The answer is yes. Yes, you do. For 1080p, the recommended specs is the GTX 1660 Super and an i7 4790, but that's only if you want to be on the borderline playable experience. And by borderline playable, I mean 30 FPS for at least 95% of the time. 1080p 30 FPS on around medium to high settings, which is at least better than the low to medium settings that the console games run these days. Now, I'm not a PC elitist or whatever the console fanboys accuse me of. I grew up playing video games in the worst possible hardwares that my poor family can buy. I played games in computers that can barely play them, so personally, I can tolerate my games running on 30 FPS, or at least with the help of RTSS, because the frame rate limiter on that is much better and gives less input lag than any in-game frame rate limiters, including the one from Cyberpunk 2077. It's not until years later, when I entered college, I do YouTube works, I buy my own stuff, and I managed to save up enough money and buy myself some decent hardware, which you can help, by the way, links down below. And even then, it's not the top tier $2,000 gaming PC rig. I'm still using this laptop because this is the one that I use for college works, but I've already graduated college and I've only got into some jobs besides YouTube, and I'm not allowed to go outside or travel anywhere, so the joke is on me, I guess. Being able to play this game on 1080p 30 FPS is a huge blessing for someone who can barely scrap enough money to pay rent, so rest assured, I can tolerate this cinematic 30 FPS experience because I grew up with it, but the same thing can be said to a lot of other people. For the sake of completion, I installed the game to my brother's PC. It has a Ryzen 5 1500X, which is a quad-core CPU as opposed to my 6-core laptop CPU. It has an RX 570, which was the king of budget 1080p GPU, and the game is installed on an NVMe SSD. Do you like a choptastic experience? Because you're gonna get some choptastic experience. This is apparently thanks to the game not being able to utilize Ryzen's SMT, or its hyper-threading features. You know how you have a CPU and it has a certain number of cores and then a certain number of threads? That's hyper-threading, and the Ryzen 5 1500X is a 4-core 8-thread CPU. The only fix so far is to download the Cyber Engine tweaks, which is something that you should download in general because apparently the game locks fix the RAM into the console preset in the settings, so it's not utilizing all of your hardware capabilities. But hey, this experience on this budget PC intended for anime games is at least better than the last gen console, because you can install an SSD in it and the PC will actually utilize it. Okay, fine, you're one of those people who say 30 FPS in my video games, that is simply unacceptable. 60 FPS or a command D to scour back into the wilds. If you want to play this game on 1080p 60 FPS ultra quality, assuming that your CPU is very good, you're gonna need RTX 3060 Ti or RTX 2080 Super, or at least according to Hardware Unboxed's GPU benchmark. See, I told you this game demands the most premium. But if you are willing to tune the settings down to medium, you can settle in for a GTX 1660 Ti, but my GTX 1660 Ti is the mobile version and not the same as the desktop version. Therefore, I can't run at a consistent 60 even on medium settings. Even when running on 30, my laptop is giving up more heat than a recently used barbecue grill, and as I mentioned before, the Grand Imperial Mall area late in the game would tear your frame rate into pieces. So yes, I'm playing this game on the best version possible, which is the PC version, but even still, the game is incredibly buggy and glitchy that it's basically on par with Bethesda games. Let's get into some of the technical problems that really annoy me. Just as I begin on the game's character creation, the game always wrestles with my controls. I tried to select these options and for some reason it just wouldn't freaking budge. Why is the game's character creation UI fighting me? It's as if the game won't let me to play it or think that my character is perfect and that I don't have to redesign it any further. Now, I always toggle crouch by pressing left control, but the game defaults toggle crouch to C, so I decided to rebind it to left control, which went reasonably at first, but then as I reload a save, the game reverts back to the default controls immediately. I thought something was a bit off, so I rebind the controls again, and then it works fine. Then I reload a save, and it goes back to the default. So at that point, I thought, screw it, I'm just gonna keep it at default, but the game's default controls is wonky. The toggle crouch button is the same as the skip dialogue button, so if you're talking to other characters, make sure you don't accidentally skip the dialogue if you try to either crouch or stand up, so the dialogue conversations don't look like the meme in How to Talk to Short People. And yes, I tried rebinding that to something else, and every single time the game reloads, the game keeps insisting that my skip dialogue button is the same as my toggle crouch button. Then there's the hacking mode, which was only an issue at first, but it's still really stupid that it's worthy of mentioning. While the game does tell me that you can enter hacking mode by holding the tab button, what the game doesn't tell me is you can toggle in and out of hacking mode with the caps lock button. So I thought me getting stuck in hacking mode is the game bugging itself out again, and I have to unnecessarily reload a save when it turns out that it was just stupid old me accidentally pressing caps lock and stupid old game not telling me that you can toggle in and out of hacking mode with caps lock. Also, the digital noises in hacking mode tend to not quit itself, which you can fix by entering in and out of hacking mode, but it's still annoying regardless. And of course, there's the really annoying dodge button. The game by default dodges by tapping the move button twice, which sounds fine on paper, but in execution, you will always be pressing the move button more than twice as you move around the area. So you're going to always accidentally dodge. If you're stealthing your way around an area, pressing the dodge button will make you to quit out of stealth and reveal your location to the enemy. Thank you so much for that, you broken heap of trash. And no, there is no option to change this in the options menu unless if you mod the game and its configuration files. And speaking of changing options, why is it that every single time I go to a certain conversation with characters like Judy, for example, the FOV resets into default levels, which is 70. The game has an FOV slider, which is great, but it would be nice if it actually freaking works at all times, without me having to reload the save just to reset it, because apparently if the game resets your FOV, you cannot change that in the options menu. And why is the default FOV of the game 70? I'm playing a PC game, not looking through a freaking telescope. Let's talk about subtitles. I play games with 0 subtitles because I like my recordings clean and without any swear words that YouTube really don't like. But this is a game that has tons and tons of other foreign language like Japanese or Spanish, so you have to turn on subtitles regardless, and there's no foreign only option, even though the game is clearly able to distinguish which one is foreign and which one is English. There's one mission of the game where I am forced to turn on subtitles because one character is talking in Korean and V is talking in English with a complete understanding of what the person is saying because they have automatic translation cyberware and I freaking don't. I'm sitting here being utterly confused and what the heck were they talking about, and the game won't let me to translate it unless if I turn every single subtitle on, including the English one. Those are all just the minor technical issues. Now let's talk about the really dumb bugs and glitches because there are loads of them. Johnny Silverhand can lean his body into empty air at times. Characters, objects, and properties will float for no reason when you're talking with them. Vehicles spawn out of nowhere. There's one vehicle that just pops in and out to the point where it yeets off another vehicle that was parking nearby. This gig in general has a really stark transition and it's visually buggy to the point of it being distracting. Some of the vehicle bugs are actually pretty hilarious, like the one that I showed during the transitions. Characters or objects will get stuck at something, and if they're not stuck at something, the game will forget to load their animation files, so they ended up T-posing in the air, asserting their dominance to everyone. V is also not susceptible to T-posing as the game forgot to render her riding the bike animation, and speaking of bike, some bikes have a really bad contact with the ground to the point where I simply can't move forward and it looks like the bike is having a very good time with the ground. There's one point where I was riding a bike and Johnny spawns out of nowhere to notify me about a wall that contains the collectible tarot card. I tried to go back to check what it is, but my bike spirals out of control, crashes into a wall, and I got stuck. Thank you, Johnny, you freaking ass hat. One of the game's interesting features is the brain dance session, where you are going through the recordings of one's character's memories and find out the things that they have either visually or audibly recorded. This can be quite buggy as well, particularly with one dealing with a certain kidnapper. I tried to go back to the first person view, but the game just wouldn't go into first person view. There's one point where the UI of the brain dance got stuck and I had to reload the save. Actually, the UI being stuck is a very common issue of the game in general. There are crucial moments of the game being completely interrupted thanks to the UI being freaking stuck. It's to the point where I have to turn the crosshairs off because it became seriously bothersome when that got stuck. But hey, all of those bugs and glitches are totally forgiven. The game has a really cute cat that swims underwater, breathes underwater, and manages to completely defy the laws of physics. Aww. Funnily enough, the cats become a significant figure later on, symbolizing V's eventual fate. So this is one of those glitches that are both unintentionally awesome and symbolic to the game's entire freaking story, assuming that that is a glitch. And those are all just the ones that I experienced. I have 57 hours worth of game footage from start to finish, and all of those are only from the clips that I have. Other people have tons and tons more interesting clips on their hands. I can go on, but we spent quite a bit of time with this one already, and I think you get my point, so let's just conclude this. CDPR has turned one of the most anticipated game of this year into a rather disappointing mess. Whatever amazing qualities that the game has is tainted by its launch issues. The game runs terribly in a platform that they promised to sell the game to. You people promised to sell the game on PS4 and Xbox One. At the very least, optimize it to work on them first. The PC and the next-gen consoles are going to run the game much better than these platforms will. So you have a lot more headroom for texture improvements, game detail improvements, ray tracing, all of that. However, CDPR is doing it backwards, which requires them to put a major patch on the console version later down the line. And even on the PC and the next-gen consoles, the game is riddled with loads of bugs and poor optimization, especially for Ryzen CPUs, where they just not utilize SMT, or PCs in general, where they just limit the CPU and GPU pool for the console settings apparently. The UI elements don't work very well, the keyboard and mouse input is very dodgy, the bugs and glitches are either not that bothersome or very immersion breaking and visually distracting. Yes, they can be fixed and they should be fixed because otherwise this game is going to remain a glitchy mess. This is a video game that really demands premium out of the consumers. Even in its most well well-optimized state, I don't think this game can perform well in the last-gen consoles, and especially in the same way as the next-generation consoles will. It's only a matter of time before you make that jump from one generation into the next. Either jump into the next-generation consoles if you can find any stocks, or build yourself a good PC if you can find any stocks. Even my budget 1080p PC runs the game much better than the consoles, because at least you can have the option to install an SSD in a PC and actually be utilized to its fullest potential, rather than, oh hey, I can read SATA too, but I don't know that this was very fast. So if you really want to be ready for the latest but not always greatest next-gen titles, you're gonna have to invest either on the PC or any of the next-gen consoles. But I suggest investing on a PC, especially for future-proofing, because you can't really upgrade the next-gen consoles. As promised, we're gonna talk about the qualities of the game in another future video. Stay subscribed for that. There are loads of great things to talk about in terms of the game's qualities, and the technical issues are not one of them. CDPR might have released a buggy open-world game in the same way that Bethesda did, but say what you want about Bethesda, at least their games are not afraid of telling China that it can shove it right up their dystopian butt.